Hi guys, welcome back. In this video, we're going to be understanding what a quota is and how it works and what are the impacts of quota on the market prices. As you can see on your screens, I've also attached a question from 2023. There's a difference was asked regarding import tariff and import quotas, and we're going to be doing this question later on in our past paper classes. This is just for reference and context. As already mentioned in the previous video as well, that quota is a legal limit on the number of imports, it's a legal limit on the quantity of imports that are allowed to, enter the country. For example, only, let's say 100,000 foreign cars are allowed this year. So that's a quota. You're limiting it. And quotas are usually compared with taxes because taxes is also limiting imports, but it is limiting imports in a way that you are making the import price expensive by imposing an import tariff on it, import tax on it, right? But here you're physically limiting the number of imports that can enter your country. That is only 100,000 foreign cars. So all those dealers in Pakistan that import cars can only import 100,000 foreign cars now. Now, what is the impact of this? You need to know the impact, right? So what happens is that when the government limits or restricts the quota, limits the quantity of the import of cars, it causes the market price of the imported good in the domestic market to rise. I will repeat, when you basically reduce the number of cars in the market, so not only the number of less cars are coming in, but the market price of those cars that are coming in will also go up. Right? The reason is, and I'll tell you why would this happen. And not only the domestic market price, as in the just a second, not only the domestic market price for the domestic market price of the imported goods, that is the price of the imported car will go up. Not only that will go up, but in fact, the market price of the domestic cars that are produced in Pakistan will also go up as well. That is, the price in general of cars will go up. And I'll explain this process. Why would this happen? So firstly, what I said, this causes the market price of the imported good in the domestic market in Pakistan to rise. That is, the price of foreign cars that are imported in Pakistan will rise. Why? Because you have limited the number of imports. Only 100,000 cars can now be imported. So they will then later on be sold at a higher price. And I'll tell you why would that happen. Right, the price that consumers in Pakistan pay for that product, that is the imported car's price, will rise. But so why are we calling and how are we calling? So why would the price rise, right? So you have to understand that let's say this is Pakistan. So in Pakistan or any country you can say, so this is the domestic supply of cars by the domestic firms, plus you have foreign imports of cars, whether you want to call it, whether this is Bangladesh or India or whatever, right? Or I don't know, any country that you want to say, right? So this is domestic supply of cars plus foreign imports of, that is, foreign cars are also being imported into Pakistan, right? So the total supply of cars would comprise of the domestic cars supplied and the imported cars supplied. So total supply is very large, and since there are a lot of cars available, the prices of cars will be low, right? The price of domestic cars will also be low because these domestic producers are competing with foreign imports of cars. So overall you see a relatively lower price of cars because domestic producers need to compete with imported cars as well. And so, but the total supply of cars is very large because you have a lot of foreign cars coming up, plus you have your own domestic production as well. Now what the government say, and this is these foreign imports, these guys here are actually threatening these guys here, right? These foreign cars being imported by dealers are threatening the domestic supply of cars, domestic firms. Now the government says only 100,000 cars will be imported, right? The government says that only 100,000 cars will be imported. So what has just happened? The total market supply of cars has fallen. Why? Because initially, let's say, you didn't really have a restriction here, but now you have a restriction here. That is only 100,000. So if this was, let's say, I don't know, maybe this was, 200,000 200,000. So now the total supply is only 300,000 of cars. Initially, let's say this wasn't 100,000. This was, let's say, 500,000. Let's say. So this was 700,000. So what we're saying is the total supply of cars goes down in the economy. And you're restricting imports. So imports, the biggest thing is that imports are artificially restricted. You can write this down because of the quota. So there are fewer cars available in the country. To be precise, there are fewer cars available in the country, right? There are fewer cars available in the country. But okay, fine, there are fewer cars available. But what happens to demand? Nothing right now. Because demand stays the same. So what's happening here is that there are fewer cars available in the country, but demand stays the same. But supply becomes smaller. So you've studied demand supply. What happens then if supply is less and the demand is still the same? There's excess demand. So what happens because of that? Well, what happens is that prices go up. Prices will go up for both. Prices will go up for foreign imported cars as well and for domestic as well. And I'll tell you why. So the price isn't really going up because you have taxed imports, but it's going up because now you have less imported cars available. So whatever the amount of cars coming in the country in Pakistan from abroad, they will be sold at a much higher price because the demand for imported cars is still the same. So people will be competing. People will be ready to pay a higher price now on those foreign cars as well. Right? Because consumers are not, because there are only 100,000 cars available. So let's say initially there were like 500 cars coming in from abroad, but now there are only 100,000 cars coming in Pakistan. But there are so many consumers who want those cars. So some consumers will be like, okay, fine, don't give it to him, give it to me. I'm ready to pay the high price. So obviously the cars will get expensive. A lot of people don't get this. A lot of people just understand quota as reducing imports, but you also need to understand the impact on prices, right? And why am I saying that domestic prices will also go up? I'll come to that point as well. So the domestic price of cars, as in the domestic, so price of imported cars in Pakistan will rise. Consumers in Pakistan paying the price of imported cars, they'll now be paying a higher price. And plus, there are less imported cars available as well. Now, since there are less imported cars available in Pakistan, this means this is an incentive for domestic firms. Why? Because now consumers who wanted those imported cars have no other option. They are willing to pay a high price on those imported cars, but then what happens? Okay, fine, but then only still, even if they buy at a higher price, still only 100,000 cars will be sold. So what happens then? They revert to domestic cars. If they revert to domestic cars, that gives domestic producers more market power, and they will also charge, though they will now be in a position to charge higher prices. So that means more consumers reverting to domestic cars, which means more production of domestic cars, more employment in the domestic industries. Domestic firms will benefit, and they have certain amount of more power now because now they aren't really facing that insane competition that they were facing from imported cars previously, because there are only 100,000 cars now, right? So, and consumers are reverted to domestic cars now, right? So they can also increase their prices, and that is why we say that prices in general in the market is rising from that perspective as well, because now you have less cars as before because you have limited those cars. If you want to look at it in this perspective, look at it this perspective. But if you want to look at from a simpler perspective, from the angle that, okay, fine, why is the price of imported cars in Pakistan going up? Pretty simple. The government of Pakistan has imposed a quota on imported cars. Less cars means the dealers will sell it at a higher price. Pretty simple. Now, and domestic producers benefit because now demand reverts or reallocates to domestic firms. They are now have more market power, obviously. So what we're saying is, so how is quota? Why are we calling quota trade protection? Because initially domestic producers were competing with foreign cars. And foreign goods were cheaper, foreign cars were better, they were more efficient, and they were also offering lower prices to consumers. You could get a bigger car, a better car at the same price or a less price than domestic cars. Now the government limits the imports. Let's say a sizable limit has been imposed. Not more than 100 cars the whole year will be imported. Oh my god. Now what happens? So foreign cars reduces number of foreign cars. This means domestic firms face less pressure. They face less pressure now. Initially so many cars were being imported. Now, which was the pressure on domestic firms? Now there's less pressure. Again an incentive for firms, for domestic firms. Again a trade protection. Less pressure means they are protected. And domestic firms can now raise their prices as well. And domestic firms will be able to sell more as well now, since the demand will revert to them. That is protection to them. The government is protecting domestic industries from foreign competition. This is through quotas. Okay? So, and if we compare this to a tariff, see, in a tariff, government adds a tax. Tariff raises the price, directly raises the price then before the car, and who pays that? Who gets that tax? Government. In a quota, there's no tax. Quota raises the price of the car, of the imported car, indirectly through restricting the supply of the car. Right? So there's no extra revenue to the government here. Got it? And plus, if the demand for imports is inelastic, tariff might have less effect as well as compared to a quota, because in a quota you are physically restricting. I mean, let's say even if the demand for that car is highly inelastic, consumers would still import the car at the high price of tariff, after they will still pay the tax and still import those cars. And the government over here benefits by gaining, governments love it because they get so much revenue. But with a quota, you're restricting, physically limiting the number of imports into the country. And there's no extra revenue to the government as well. So to sum it up, what we're saying is that quota, what happens is that when the government imposes a quota on foreign cars, it limits the number of imported cars that can enter the country, right? And so the supply of foreign cars in Pakistan, in the domestic market in Pakistan, falls because of that, right? But consumers still demand these cars. So now there is less availability of these cars, which creates what? Which creates scarcity of, scarcity. There's scarcity. And this scarcity pushes up the domestic market price of imported cars. Imported cars in Pakistan are now being sold at a higher price. Right? See, you have to understand, these imported cars are being sold in Pakistan at a high price now because of the quota. Why? See, imported cars are part of the same market. They are part of the same Pakistani market, right? They're sold in Pakistan. So, because imported cars are part of the same market and they are competing with domestically produced cars, so the restriction on imports through quota, right, protects domestic firms because it reduces foreign competition now. And this gives domestic producers more market power, allowing them to raise their prices of their own cars as well. Because now consumers have less alternative. They can only just get 100 cars. Right? So quota raises the domestic price of imported cars by restricting their supply. Okay, guys? And also it gives more power to domestic firms, and they can also raise their prices, which is an incentive for them as well, and in a sense protection to them. They would now end up producing more cars because demand reverts to domestic firms. They will have more market power. They can raise their own prices of cars as well. They will benefit now. So this is a trade protection. Got it, guys? Why? Because now there is reduced competition through quotas. Got it? So I'm going to be keeping the video till here. Now, you don't need to know any diagrams for quotas. Just this explanation is enough. These are sort of questions come in 8 markers. You're not going to be required any diagrams for ASCI for the quota, right? So there's no need to go through any diagrams. They are not prescribed in the AS 9708 syllabus. There is a diagram for quota, but it is not in our syllabus. It is in usually other boards. like Edexcel, AQA, OCR. You don't need to go through the diagram for or IB as well. The International Bachelorate program also has that diagram for quota, but you don't need to go through the diagram for quota. It's not in our 9708 syllabus. But there is a diagram for tariff, which is very important, which we will be covering in the next video. And after that, I just need to go through the limitations of trade protection. Yeah, the limitation of trade protection, and then we are done, and the evaluation, and then we're done with this chapter. Okay guys, so see you on the next video. Thank you so much for watching. Until then, take care.